Warning, this podcast is likely to contain numerous instances of vulgarity and or profanity, which some may deem inappropriate. If you're of an overly sensitive disposition, stop listening now. Additionally, the podcast will be filled with numerous spoilers throughout, so if you haven't had the opportunity to read, watch, or enjoy the story prior to the show, please do so, before continuing with this episode of Sweet Story Bro.
Get ready for action! 3, 2, 1, fight!
We are back with another episode of Sweet Story Bro, the only podcast that allows me to drink as much coffee as I want whilst talking about something I'm truly passionate about, and that's geek stories. All right. Well, thank you for downloading the newest episode of Sweet Story Bro, number 7. And this one's going to be a doozy, because it is on a very controversial book. For those that pay attention to the Monday mentions, and that's most of you now, I would imagine, you guys know that this episode is going to be based on the expanded universe of Star Wars, specifically just what happened immediately after they blew up the second Death Star. Well, maybe not immediately, not literally immediately, but the fallout of that. What happens to a world that's been gripped by an imperial rule once it's finally freed from it? This book explores that. Now, like I said, thank you so much for downloading the latest episode. I just want to give a quick shout out to you guys for still helping the podcast to maintain its place at time of recording on the new and noteworthy on the podcast app. That's amazing. I'm so thrilled that we're clinging there and somehow swinging away and being a part of, I've got giants next to me. The Empire Podcast is there, and I'm obviously not really near it, but like I'm on the same page as it. That's pretty amazing, and that's all thanks to you, man. And I just wanted to take a second to read a couple of the reviews. People have been leaving 5-star reviews, and it's been so great to read what some of you guys have had to say. And I just want to take a second in order to give back to you guys. Let's have a look here. How about this? This one's by a Loco Narkills. This podcast is an amazing look and dissection at narratives through the media. If it's gaming or paperbacks or movies, it will be torn to pieces. I loved it so much. Made me appreciate a good story. Keep up the amazing job. And he's happy Valentine's Day as well, because that's posted on Valentine's Day. That's a really nice one. Thank you so much for taking the time to write that. I really appreciate it. Let's have a look at another one here. Let's see. Okay. This one, Perfectly Podcasty by Jack1234 says, where to start? Not only an enjoyable podcast for those of the more creative and inquisitive nature, but also those that just love a good story. Bro. The author, that's me, also takes on feedback as the podcast grows to suit those of his ever-growing audience. Highly recommended. And then he does the okay emoji with the hand. Thank you very much to both of you for such kind words, for taking the time out to listen to the podcast, and importantly, to give me the feedback about what you felt I could have done better. And, Jack1234 rightly points that out. It's why I've adopted the, hey, drink a gallon of coffee and talk about the story that you love or that you want to talk about in depth with you. Like we're just sitting down. Like you're here, man. Like you're here. It's the best way to get through the commute. Just talking to a friend and talking and having somebody discuss something that you both engage with. And of course, on this podcast, that happens to be story. Geeky stories, pretty much specifically, to be honest with you. I also want to give a quick shout out to somebody who gifted the podcast its very first gift, which is amazing. I'm holding it in my hand right now. And is a book by Philip Reeve that I've never read before, but was recommended by a fan of the show and a friend of mine, John. And it's called Mortal Engines. And I don't know if you guys have read this or not, but this book left an indelible impression with a young John. And he felt it was so good, he wanted to gift it to me to support the podcast and give me something else to read to share with you guys. So thank you very much, John, for being one of the early adopters of the show, listening, giving me the feedback, being honest enough with me to give me the feedback that I needed, even though it wasn't easy necessarily to take, because feedback, because I'm sure the majority of you guys might be creative listening to a story podcast the way that you are. Feedback isn't necessarily the easiest thing to be given. So to be able to give it, take it on the chin, adapt, it's helped the podcast exponentially. It's thanks to people like you, John, for taking the time out to try and help me hone this. So thank you. And thank you very much. I will be reviewing Mortal Engines in a future episode. A gift from a fan and bro to the show. Now, whilst we're talking about, fan feedback, bro feedback to the show and people getting in contact and things like that, I actually had a response for the Arkham Knight episode that I did from a listener called Dom Dove, and I just wanted to take a couple of seconds in order to read out a couple of things that he had to say about the last 15 minutes of the show, because he really enjoyed the show. So thank you, Dom, for checking out in the first instance and having such positive things to say. It's just such a shame, it seems, that our opinion on the ending differs so wildly, and I just wanted to give you an idea of where Dom was coming from with this. I mean, firstly, the email's titled, Steve, it was going so well, which is kind of indicative, I suppose, of where his feelings are on the subject. I'm going to start here, and it's not all negative. In fact, not a lot of it is negative, which is really nice. So thank you, Dom. He opens with a really nice compliment. He says, great show, really rewarding and richly researched, coming fresh out of completing the game on 240%. Your analysis of the story is really, really on point, and I had a wonderful time listening to it. Started listening on the way home and couldn't bring myself to stop once I got there. Thanks, man. That means so much to me. I had all these things in mind that I wanted to send you. Things about the game I like, things I don't like, things I agreed with you about, things I disagreed with you about. My amazement at how you got through the whole show without getting the name of Panessa Studios right once, etc., etc. I'll hold my hands up to that. I did get it wrong. I think I said it in the show as well, how I got it wrong a lot. But the last 15 minutes of the show bummed me out so much that I just can't bring myself to. After all, who cares what I did and didn't like? Well, I do, Dom. That's why I want to know what you guys think. What matters here is story, true, and the storytelling of the game and its incredible experience. And as a huge Batman fan, Arkham fan, and Rocksteady fan, I 100% absolutely disagree with you about the ending. I probably couldn't disagree more. And so in the interest of shedding light on some perspective, I want to tell you why. Now, I'm going to go ahead here and read the major points from Dom's 2,000-word email to me, 2,000 plus. And you know what? That's not a negative, man. That just shows he's passionate about what he's talking about. And this is what I'm trying to get from you guys. It's awesome that old Dumb Dove did this. He says, the game doesn't ever pause the story and ask you to keep up with its side missions. It gives you complete freedom for the whole game, and you can reach the primary ending of the game, the actual gameplay bit, not the cutscene bookend, without really touching any of the most wanted missions. That's pretty fair, apparently. But for those of us who have stuck with all of these incredible bonus threads for so many years, and again in Night, it was incredibly satisfying and rewarding for those parts of the experience to have their own conclusion. That Batman cannot truly leave until the other major threats for which he feels so responsible have been dealt with. And I love that part of the email. I think that actually does make a really, really good point. Batman wouldn't be able to leave these rogues at large, and that much is fair because, as he rightly says, he would feel responsible for it. That's just a part of the character of Batman, part of his dynamic. That part of the email is the one that resonated with me the most because it just shows how much you love Batman as a character, Dom. And I'm sure he resonates with so many people as he does with me. But in terms of narrative structure for that game, I stand by what I said, and if you guys want to listen to it, jump back to last episode if you haven't checked it out already to see where we're coming from. But I think if you can do it in games like Grand Theft Auto so well, where the natural story does have an arc that progresses and comes to a great conclusion before then opening up to the rest of the world to allow you to do all the side missions that you missed or didn't do, so on and so forth, then this should have had the same sort of thing. It should have had a narrative structure that incorporated itself into the ending without the need to finish everything within that most wanted wheel. And that's the major thing that just sticks out to me is the fact that there was no choice to do it. It was forced. But from a character level, I do understand where you're coming from. So thank you, Dom, for writing in. I really do appreciate it. And of course, if anybody else has any thoughts on any of the past stories that I did, or of course on this one that I'm doing today, do not hesitate to tweet me at SweetStoryBro or send me an email at sweetstorybro@icloud.com. So I just wanted to throw in very quickly, how have I been recently? How's Temporary doing? Use this as a little bit of a space to just encapsulate my life, what I've been up to, because it's all well and good to jump into the reviews, but hey, maybe you want to know a little bit more about me, Steve Russell, your friend, your writer, Steve Russell. The temporary rewrite's still going, almost done with it, maybe 3/4 of the way through, and then I'm so happy with how this redraft is going. It's the strongest redraft I've ever done on this manuscript. I'm ripping stuff out that is superfluous to the story. I'm tightening it up, making it better, making the structure stronger, giving true agency to characters, purpose and constant through lines for everybody. It's really helping, and I'll tell you what. Honestly, the podcast has helped me see the flaws in my writing in a way that I'd never seen before. And this was one of the major things I wanted to get out of doing it in the first place. So it's paying off, man. It's paying dividends. I just hope it has the happy ending that I really need it to, I really want it to have. I say need. It sounds dramatic. But of course, I want to have that success for the podcast, get that out there, and for the book so you guys can read it. That would be amazing. What a story that would be. But if you are interested, of course, you can check out my blog, writestevewright.com. I update it whenever there's anything that I want to bring to your attention in regards to the book. And sometimes I use it for travel stuff as well. I have used it as a travel blog on occasion just to document my journeys as well, because they all influence me to some point. You know, the travels you make, the people you meet, these things shape you as a person. So that's where I'm at right now. I hope all of you are doing well. I hope you're having a great day or night or whatever you happen to be doing while you're listening to this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and SoundCloud. Now, I assume for most of you, you might already be there right now. And, of course, leave a review, 5 stars if you please. That would be very helpful to keep us up there in the new and noteworthy and climb those ranks again. Because we were, as I said, as high as number 36. Oh, incidentally, if you type in Sweet into the podcast app now, we're actually number 1. We're number 1 now when you type in Sweet, the first suggestion. That's all thanks to you. The attention that Sweet Story Bro has received has been wonderful, and it's really taken me aback because I'm being able to reach out to people now and receive things to look at. It's amazing. This is something I'm not used to. It's a new world for me, and it's very exciting. But because of the success, I want to give back a little bit. So I'd be really interested in running competitions going forward. In case this is something you guys were interested in, let me know. Let me know the sort of format that you'd want, if it's just a random name or if you guys want me to generate a question, and then I'll pick randomly from the right question whoever answered. And I will send you a prize. I will send you what could potentially be your new favorite story. It's going to be like a lucky dip sort of thing. And I'll write a little note to go with it too. But it could be a book, it could be a DVD, a comic book, a graphic novel, whatever. But you could potentially find your next favorite story by simply answering a question or just throwing your name into the hat to be picked out. If that's something that interests you, I need to hear back from you to put this into effect as soon as possible. But I want to give back to you guys, basically. That's the long and short of it. You guys have supported me so well. We're only up to episode 7. I want to give back to you. And I really think that a competition's the way to do it. So get in contact and let me know, man. Let me know if I'm right. Because I got prizes I want to give. Oh. So, this book, again, if you were paying attention to the Monday Mentions, now called the Monday Mentions, no longer the less nazzily titled Monday Reveal. Ugh. Monday Mentions is, unless you guys have a better name, it's Monday Mentions now because obviously I mentioned what it's going to be within the tweet every other Monday. It's by Chuck Wendig, author Chuck Wendig, and it is the book Star Wars Aftermath, or Aftermath Star Wars, depending how you want to read it. And it is the expanded universes novel that takes place straight after Empire Strikes Back, the 6th movie in the series. And it was the bridge. This was the precursor. This book was meant to tie in a lot of loose ends and set up a lot of stuff that fitted perfectly, or would fit perfectly, should I say, sorry, between Empire and The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens, which came out last December, of course, to great fanfare. I think that movie did pretty good. It did all right, I guess. But why this book? Why did I pick Chuck Wendig's Aftermath? Out of all the books I could have read, after all the geek stories that just yell out to me, why this one? Why Aftermath? I'll tell you why. It's no secret that I'm a writer. It's no secret that I want to get published. It's no secret that Chuck Wendig has written a book on this very subject called The Kick-Ass Writer, 1001 Ways to Write Great Fiction, Get Published, and Earn Your Audience. And I read this book. I have a friend. Her name is Katya Harris, and a great author. You can follow her on Twitter. She lent me her copy of this. She was very generous to lend me her version of this so I could read it. And it was insightful. I enjoyed reading it. His style, I believe, would be very Marmite-esque. You either love it or you hate it. I think this could set a precursor for the tone of this book as well, the aftermath that is. But I gleaned a lot of really good information from the Kick-Ass Writer. I really enjoyed reading it. Sure, the tone of it, after a certain while, it didn't great, but I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. I understand. He turns everything to a joke. He doesn't take anything incredibly seriously. And it does present it in a more digestible fashion, if you will. It's easier to take in that information when it's written in such a informal style. And I liked it, like I said, but over the course of 300 pages, wherever it happened to be, at a certain point you hit this wall where you're like, okay, you're going to make another funny. I get it. Okay, wonderful. But overall, I found it to be a great read, an insightful read that helped me. There were definitely a few tips out of the 1001, more than a few, that I wanted to take on board, adapt, evolve into my writing style, and then hopefully help me further myself and better myself. Because that's what this is all about, man. It's like jiu-jitsu. It's all about learning. It doesn't matter, and I know it's easy to say for anybody that does jiu-jitsu or martial arts, it's easy to say it doesn't matter if you lose. It's easy to say, but it's another thing to actually mean it. To be tapped out in jiu-jitsu, especially by a lower ranked belt, doesn't matter because you've just learned something. You've both just learned something. So it's a valuable lesson. Don't let your ego get in the way. And this is another thing that I have had to learn with the writing. Don't let your ego get in the way. Understand you know nothing. Open yourself up like a cup and allow your head to be filled with information. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything. Don't let anybody ever tell you that because they're giving you feedback that it's fucking gospel, because that's not true at all. That's just opinion. As an opinion that's being created through a prism of their experiences, which is inherently personal to them. So what they have to say, they have every right to say it because that's how they interpreted it, but that does not mean that it is right. And it doesn't mean that you have to pay attention to it. Not entirely. If you agree with it, great. If you agree with part of it, great. If you agree with none of it, great. Doesn't matter. Take what you need, leave what you don't. So the cover of the book, I'm looking at it right now, it's huge. Star Wars Aftermath right there front and center, and the Star Wars font, Chuck Wendig underneath there. And you can see the second Death Star exploding or in a state of explosion. And there's just one little X-Wing in the bottom right corner there, just going away, flying away. And that's about it. It kind of gets the story across straight away. And the fact it's called Aftermath, you know what you're into here because you're going into an expanded universe story. So you're like, okay, cool. And this is what it is. It concerns the Death Star in some way, in this case, the aftermath of when it was blown up, and the Empire falls. Although it's weird that there's only one X-Wing. I'm pretty sure there were more X-Wings in the movie that dealt with that. And that's really it. There's really not too much else to say about the cover. It's very, very straightforward. I mean, it doesn't really grab your attention, honestly, and the font of Star Wars Aftermath is huge. It takes up the majority of the page. Not only that, it's oddly skewed, kind of like if you used to watch MTV Cribs, how the camera was always at a really awkward, annoying angle. Nothing's ever filmed straight. It was always that 45-degree angle. They've done the same sort of thing here, and I don't know if it was just to fill the state of the page or the cover or whatever, but man, it is what it is, and I guess it looks okay. It's not the most captivating cover in the world. But hey, it's Star Wars, so it's going to fucking sell. And sell it did. But did it deserve to? The question becomes, was this story a good one? Or the way I break it down, as you guys know, officially too sweet or not sweet enough? Now, I'm going to read the blurb to you here. the description of the story to grab your attention that's featured on the book, and this one's actually taken from Amazon.co.uk. Okay? And I quote, "As the Empire reels from its critical defeats at the Battle of Endor, the Rebel Alliance, now a fledgling new republic, presses its advantage by hunting down the enemy's scattered forces before they can regroup and retaliate. But above the remote planet Akiva, an ominous show of the enemy's strength is unfolding. Out on a lone reconnaissance mission, pilot Wedge Antilles watches Imperial Death Star destroyers gather like birds of prey circling for a kill. But he's taken captive before he can report back to the New Republic leaders. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, former rebel fighter Nora Wexley has returned to her native world, war-weary, ready to reunite with her estranged son, and eager to build a new life in some distant place. But when Nora intercepts Wedge Antilles' that's literally has written, Antilles' urgent distress call, she realizes her time as a freedom fighter is not yet over. What she doesn't know is just how close the enemy is, or how decisive and dangerous her new mission will be. Determined to preserve the Empire's power, the surviving Imperial elite are converging on Akiva for a top-secret emergency summit to consolidate their forces and rally for a counterstrike. But they haven't reckoned on Nora and her newfound allies, her technical genius son, a Zabrak bounty hunter, and a reprobate Imperial defector, who are prepared to do whatever they must to end the Empire's oppressive reign once and for all. So it sounds pretty engaging. And we're dealing with a character that we recognize from the pre-established myth, the mythos of the movie, the lore, Wedge Antilles and whatnot. Just a little preface. I mean, I'm not too well-versed with expanded universe stuff. It's only in recent years that I've actually really accepted that I'm a Star Wars fan. I rejected this thing for the longest while. I really don't know why. I do think that some of it is this is going to be controversial, and it doesn't affect my opinion on this book and this book's story. But I do think elements of it are somewhat overrated. I don't know if it necessarily deserves the redonkulous amounts of praise and fan service that it receives. But receive it does, and I'm grateful that we're getting new movies and things like that. I think it's great. And with the new expanded universe, I just figured it was a great jumping on point to start reading the new canon, because none of the other stuff that happened counts anymore. And I know that frustrated a lot of people, but that's where we're at. They made a business decision to discount it and start from scratch, like a comic book, hitting a certain number and then bring it back down to reboot it. The only other one I've read is A New Dawn, which was the precursor that led into the Rebels TV show, which is pretty good. I enjoy the Rebels TV show, actually. I've only watched the first season, but I thought it was pretty fun throughout. I actually think the Rebels TV show has a lot of influence on this book, which we will talk about later. A little factoid for you, in case you weren't aware. Did you know Chuck Wendig actually got the job to work on this novel after a tweet? Seriously, I shit you not. I've actually got the tweet here in front of me, and I'll read it out for you in case you're unaware. And I quote, This is what he put. This is what a human being put out there on the internet, and he got a job to write Star Wars after this. Dear Internet, I want to write a licensed Star Wars novel. Please make this happen. Squeezes internet hard enough to make wishes fall out. That's the original tweet by Chuck Wendig requesting work on Star Wars, which was tweeted on the 5th of September, 2014. Now, once he got the gig, thanks to his work on another book, one of his books called Under the Empyrean Sky, it only took him 45 days to write this book. Now, I really don't know if that it extends to 45 days for a first draft, or 45 days from, yes, you got the job, here's what you can and can't do, here's the characters you can't touch, so on and so forth, get it done. 45 days later, boom, done, book is finished. I really don't know, but I know it took him 45 days. That's what I found through my research. And this has polarized a lot of opinion, because a lot of people feel that this has affected the quality of the writing of it. Because this is a very, in case you weren't aware, a very controversial tome, a very divisive Star Wars story. I went to his official website and I pulled something from here, actually. Somebody left a message for him, which was quite unkind. It's by a woman called Helen, and this was written on his personal blog, which is terribleminds.com. And I've not included the entire thing to help with the flow, obviously, but this is what she wrote. Quote, "How many times have you told writers not to respond to bad reviews? Yet here you are crying and responding to bad reviews under the BS premise that it's a coordinated attack. If it were an attack, you'd notice a spike in one-star reviews on your other books too. Grow up, Chuck. You wrote the book in 45 days and it reads like it. Now you have to deal with the repercussions of your decision. The book is being poorly reviewed because it's honestly a terrible book." End quote. Wow. I'm not at a stage yet where I can receive positive criticism, and I'm obviously not at a stage where I can receive negative criticism, but that's not very nice. And he does call her out on this. He doesn't usually, from what I gather, he doesn't usually respond to what people say on his personal website through the comments and stuff. And this is his response, straight from Chuck himself. And I quote, "Helen, I'm going to let this comment through to respond to it, even though it was particularly rude, and, frankly, I should have let you tumble helplessly into the span oubliette. Here's the thing. I wrote most of my books in about 30 to 45 days. Some books take a little longer, up to 90, but I write very, very quickly. I write this way because I've been a professional writer now for over 15 years. In many of those years, I've acted as that rah avis, a professional full-time writer." End quote. Now, that obviously puts me to shame because, as I mentioned earlier, I've been working on this concept for a long time, temporary, and it's taken me a long time. But I'm not a professional writer. I don't have the responsibility and the knowledge that he's accrued over 15 years of doing this, where I assume he did it very slowly at first and then got faster and faster. If I were able to do this full time and have an editor that I can fall back on to go, this is shit, change this can be better, change this, do that, I'll be like, okay, or no, depending on how I agree or disagree. Maybe doing something in 90 days would definitely be doable. I'd love to be at that stage to be able to commit to that. Write, fight, talk. That's the perfect life for me. I talk about it on the Vault Comics podcast as well that I guest hosted on. Write, fight, talk. I love that. I really wish one day that could be a reality. But this is actually going to be the first of a trilogy to be written by Wendig. And what a story that is, man. Like, to send a tweet out into the universe and have enough fans garner up and drum up enough attention that the universe paid attention. You know, they saw him. Because you could send a tweet out and it just gets lost in the mire of other tweets being sent out every second. There are hundreds, thousands, obviously. You know, maybe, I don't know hundreds of thousands, but thousands and thousands of things being sent off every single second. And somebody in a position of power to go, yes, okay, yeah, cool, saw it. Now, as a really quick personal aside, if anybody's out there listening who has the sway to do this, maybe I should send a tweet out. I would love to do an Uncharted book. I'm such a big fan of Uncharted. I'm so surprised there's only one tie-in novel. I'd like to make that too. Either that or a Doctor Who story would be pretty amazing. But I know I'd love to work on a Nathan Drake story, absolutely, and have that be somewhat registered as canon. That would be great. So you hear that, universe? Throwing that out there. Maybe I need to send a tweet out. It would also help if I was a successful writer the way Chuck was, but an Uncharted story. That's what I'd like to do. But yeah, somebody saw it. Somebody saw his tweet. They saw it and they were familiar with his work, Under the Empyrean Sky, which I've not read. This is the only thing apart from the kick-ass writer of Chuck's I've read, and it's the main reason I chose to read it. I wanted to see how much of his own advice he implemented. And I don't know if he paid attention to everything that he wrote. But that's fine. Because he wrote the book. He wrote the best book that he thought he could write within the parameters he was given by Disney and Lucasfilm. Now, first and foremost, I got to get this out of the way. The writing style. This is probably one of the major things that divided a lot of people initially. The writing style of this book is done in a third-person limited present tense. Now, you may be more familiar with a traditional third-person limited past tense. That's how temporary is written. That's how a lot of books are written. You know, he picked up something. He talked to her, or whatever it happens to be, as opposed to he picks it up. He talks to her. And that initial shift is very, very immediate. It's very, very, at first, not grating at all, but just odd because you're so used to reading things in a past tense that to actually read something of such high regard in a present tense was immediately just knocked me off balance for a second because I wasn't expecting it. And that's when this immediate things I noticed after cracking the spine, so to speak, because I did read it on my Kindle. It also has a really heavily fragmented writing style. What I mean by that is it has very short, very punchy sentences that a lot of readers didn't like from what I can see. Now, I don't usually read other reviews because I don't want them to inflect my own opinion in any way. But I've been sitting on this book for a little while, just stating my thoughts on it, and I've already come to my conclusions. Nothing's going to change the way I feel about this book, which you'll find out at the end of this podcast, of course. So I was really surprised to see how divisive the sci-fi crowd was, the Star Wars crowd was in relation to this. But did I like it? I'll tell you what, I didn't hate it. It made the sentences sort of jagged to read, like you're reading and it's like, okay, stop, and no, okay, stop, okay, stop. But it didn't take me out of it. It didn't bother me. It didn't hit me as a note of like contention. I didn't read these numerous full stop sentences, really, really staggered flow and go, this is annoying, this bothers me, and I wish to complain about it to a point where Chuck maybe might validate my existence by responding to me. No, nothing like that. I read it. This is the thing that I do with this show, and I don't think a lot of people do this with their review shows. I'd really, really try to keep it even-handed. I want to talk about the good things that I liked as well as the things I didn't really enjoy. I'm not saying it's per se bad. I'm just saying it wasn't for me, and ultimately that's all this is, of course, is just an opinion. One dude's opinion, cup of coffee, and an opinion, and a microphone, and that's it. But I didn't hate it. You might hate it. You might love it. You'd have to check it out and decide yourself. Now, the story itself, it begins in Coruscant, okay? Former capital of the Galactic Empire, of course. And again, I'm a recent Star Wars acceptor of my fandom. I've been watching them for years since I was a kid, like a lot of people, but it's only in my 20s where I was like, you know what? Yeah, I do like Star Wars quite a bit, actually. Palpatine's statue is being torn down within a square. A la Saddam Hussein. That was definitely the vibe and a political comparison point I think that was being made here, honestly. And Imperial police on speeders appear, and this actually riles up the people to the point of rioting, and that sets the tone straight away. We are in a post-Empire world. We do not know what is going to happen. Does the Empire have a second command that can take over from Palpatine now that he's dead? Was it Vader, who's also reported to be dead? If that's the case, who then takes over, if anybody? The entire political state is in a state of constant flux right now. Anything could happen, especially with the Rebel Alliance, now known as the New Republic, trying to take order back to themselves. And this is the interesting thing, because obviously the rebels are trying to quash out the rest of the Imperial forces who are existing within these fringe locations. And that brings us quite nicely to Wedge Antilles, who's attempting to explore the Outer Rim for potential Empire activity after the success of the Rebel Alliance. As I said, blowing up the Death Star at the end of Return of the Jedi. I think I might have said Empire earlier. I do apologize. I meant Return. I am very sorry about that. A comms blackout, however, leads to 2 Star Destroyers getting the jump on him, which is handy. Giving a fake call sign isn't enough for him to get by, and he's actually grabbed by the tractor beam and brought into the the Imperial Star Destroyers. And once he's in the landing bay, he takes a really risky shot. He's in the belly of the beast right now, man. So what does he do? He fucking goes all out. He blows up the ship that he's in, which injures him in the process, but he is able, due to this distraction, to crawl into the ducts and escape. So he's just fucking like a bacteria or parasite existing within this Star Destroyer's guts, trying to survive, trying to creep around and not get caught. The actual order to bring him in was made by Ray Sloan, who has actually appeared in the Expanded Universe before. Rather coincidentally and appropriately, she was in A New Dawn And since she was in A New Dawn, she's received a promotion. And I've got a quote from here because I just thought this was a little bit weird as insofar as a decision to write into the book. And I quote, Ray Sloan stands in the glass-encased balcony overlooking the gathered battalion of stormtroopers. This lot, like Nils, are imperfect. Those who received top marks at the Academy went on to serve on the Death Star, or in Vader's command ship, the Executor. Half of them didn't even complete the Academy. They were pulled out of training early. End quote. Now, I wanted to bring this to attention because this is talking about stormtroopers, man. We all know how well stormtroopers can aim. We all know the high ratio at which they hit their targets. So I'm asking you, and I'd love if you could actually answer this for me. Why would anybody want these troopers to comprise an army? You know, I mean, does this actually explain why so many stormtroopers can't actually hit anything whilst firing? You know, and if these guys didn't even finish basic training, but the elite were with Vader and the Empire, who then got blown up, just how shit are these guys she's talking about? She's talking about having people on this ship, and they can't even do anything because they didn't even complete training. These weren't even people who were chosen to go assist the Emperor or Vader, for God's sakes. I just found that really odd. It's basically going, yeah, these guys are a bit shit, so let's not take them as a credible threat. I thought it was a little bit weird. Now we go from here in the outer space by Akiva, more to planet side now. We're going on to Akiva, and we're actually with Nora Wexley as she travels to Akiva, her home planet. This is a character who has served the Rebel Alliance, having picked up as an ace pilot. And it's thanks to these skills that she's able to avoid the TIE fighters that attempt to shoot her down in the smuggler's ship, owned by a character called Uwerdo Naicho. She paid for safe travel on. So she actually takes the controls and pilots them down to safety within a ship that's not even hers because she's that damn good. Now, landing on Akiva, it's revealed that she's actually home for a very specific purpose, a personal purpose. She's there to look for her son, who she hasn't seen in 3 years. Needing a way out now after finding him, she actually strikes a deal with Uwerdo to get them off planet in the same ship, which is called the Moth, when it comes to it. And next up, you know, we meet another character because there's a lot of meeting characters early on. No need for world building because, it's Star Wars. We kind of know the world that we're going to be playing within, that sandbox that we're going to be existing within. We get it. And I think Chuck does a good thing by just jumping straight in and going, hey, man, all this is pre-established. You're aware of this stuff. Okay, this is a planet called Akiva, and go. I think that definitely helps. He's hitting the ground running here. But the next up, he introduces us to a character called Sinjir Rath Velis, who's definitely one of the more compelling characters of this story. I very much enjoyed reading the scenes with Sinjir in it. He's actually an Imperial loyalty officer, or should I be more specific, he's an ex-Imperial loyalty officer. Now, the easiest thing that you can think of here, and this is gleaned from interviews I was reading while I was doing the research for this podcast, Chuck compared him and his job title to Imperial Secret Police. He polices the Imperials. He's looking out for weaknesses, for traitors, things like that. He's got their eye on them throughout. He's very, very cunning and malicious, and this comes through his training that the Imperials gave him the training to find the weak Imperials, because you're only as strong as your weakest link, I suppose, is the message and the idea that brought this secret police concept into being in the first place. But what's he up to now? Since the war is over, despite tensions rising and riots on looming ahead, what's an ex-Imperial loyalty officer doing? Well, he's getting wasted is what he's doing. He's on Akiva getting wasted because he now suffers through things that I think a lot of people would understand: a lack of purpose, a loss of identity. If he defined himself through his job, which incidentally he should never, ever, ever do, not to go all Fight Club on you, but your job doesn't define you. You would go through that. I get that, this is all I've ever done. This is all I've ever been trained to do. Who am I now? What do I do now? And I thought I pulled an interesting quote from Chuck, actually, which was done with a website called denofgeek.us. You can find it there. And he's talking directly about Sinjir's character in relation to the Empire. And I quote, "The Empire is obviously such a massive machine that it's not entirely a bunch of mustache-twirling bad people. there is a massive cross-section of the galaxy's population inside the Empire. Obviously, the Empire is based a little bit on some of the world's most upsetting governments. Those governments always have loyalty-type officers, people who check their own people for loyalty. I don't feel we've seen that laid out well enough. What is that character like in both the old world and now that things have changed? Because ultimately, the Empire is his enemy, abstractly. He's forced to constantly rat out his own people and investigate them, so he almost hates the Empire just by dint of what he sees in it. End quote. And they tie this into Singer's character wonderfully throughout, so much so at one point he's almost flat out saying what Chuck just said, I was trained to find the enemy within the Empire. I hate them as much as you do, and I was actually trained to hate them and to find their weakness and to hate them for their weaknesses. So it's an interesting sort of compelling argument, honestly. I mean, the Singer scene ends with a rumble when two Imperials come in, because a Twi'lek, who goes under the name apparently of Orgadomo Dokura, shows Singer the latest holovid that's doing the rounds, which actually has Princess Leia speaking about the fall of the Empire, the destruction of the second Death Star. And, these stormtroopers enter the fray, and despite Singer's best efforts not to get involved, Dokura just pipes up and turns everything into an altercation. Before you know it, Singer's been in a fight and is running outside, followed by this Twi'lek, who's a little bit of a groupie fanboy for him, I guess, now. And it feels at this point like all the major characters had been seemingly introduced. We haven't really met Temmin just yet. He actually has a really fun introduction playing a game as well. But the majority of the main characters have been introduced, and it's all been in a pretty short period of time. The unrest in the galaxy is still rife. The tension is high between the few remaining Empire outposts, and the towns that the Empire still controls are rising to riot, as seen on Coruscant. The entire thing is a political boiling pot, and it was really interesting because you may expect to read a Star Wars story and be caught up in a sweeping adventure, a black and white adventure where good is good and bad is bad. But Chuck tries to gray these lines here, especially because we follow things from the perspective of Ray Sloan on certain points. And she's actually quite a likable character. She just seems to be a little bit... She entrusts too much into the order of what the Empire was, as opposed to what it could be with a new Republic. Now, it doesn't take Nora long to track down her son, Temmin, who seems to be running some sort of racket, selling spare parts and things like that. And she actually comes to his aid after 3 goons come to confront him over something he's supposedly stolen from a bigwig gangster on the planet called Surat Nuat, a Salustan gangster who resides on Akiva. Not only does she find him here, but this is also a really cool introduction of a character called Mr. Bones, who's a B-1 battle droid. So those droids in the show that's just like Roger, Roger. The show, well, yeah, the show as well, but the movies, Roger, Roger, blah, blah, blah. Those really useless ones, cannon fodder, essentially. He's repurposed one. He just dressed him in like this weird bone ensemble, hanging bones off of him, and called him Mr. Bones. And there you go. You got yourself a pretty fun sidekick to include into it. And he's a pretty cool character, honestly. He doesn't really provide too much. He doesn't even really do too much. But as a concept, he's fun. And so it works, I've got a quote here from the book. It's just a little bit weird. It doesn't really tie into where we are in the story. I just wanted to share it because I found it as a little bit of an odd writing style. And I quote, "A blurry image, a sound, whap, whap, whap. The blurry image shakes. It gets blurrier for a second and then focuses the other way, lurching inelegantly toward clarity." End quote. Now, the only reason I want to bring this up is because this writing style was something I accidentally adopted during an early temporary draft. And that got a lot of negative response from the editor I gave it to. I paid him to read it. It wasn't cheap. I used a service. It was all above board, of course. And I just find it interesting that it's used here. It's not good. It's not bad. It is what it is. I'm accepting of that. I have an opinion on it. I think it works. So I just found it really odd that Chuck Wendig can use it here. And, well, in fairness, it's not universal praise, as we've discussed. But, hey, it's just interesting that I paid somebody who ripped mine apart. And, I'm not bitter about it. Maybe a little bit. But I'm grateful for it because it helped me improve the story overall, and that's what matters. And yet here it is in a book that reached I think as high as number 4 on the New York bestseller list. I also found it really odd, actually, how many parentheticals he used. Just the usage of parentheticals, brackets. It's interesting, but it does give the flow of his sentences a feeling of a 10-year-old story. And I really don't mean that to be as insulting or as degrading as you might take it to be. It's just... it gives the feeling like he's remembering something halfway through writing it, and he couldn't wait to jot it down, so he just put it right there in the bracket in the middle of the sentence so he could get it out of his system. And, like I say, it just reminds me of reading like kids fiction, or like if it was written by a kid or something like that. Obviously, Chuck Wendig is not a kid. He's a successful author, one who's in charge of a trilogy of books for the Star Wars universe. But I don't know. I just found it really weird, The short staggered sentences doesn't bother me. The present tense, although a little bit of a handbrake at first, I got used to. But the parentheticals I just found interesting. It was just a really interesting writing style to fall back on constantly. Now, at this point in the story, we're back up in space with above Akiva, with Ray Sloan, who's able to find and track down Wedge Antilles, who tries to shoot off a message from a comm station, getting a message out to the New Republic about what's going on and the fact that he needs help. And a third Imperial Star Destroyer arrives above Akiva, carrying some pretty important people above it, people who could help determine the future of the Empire if they're able to get on board. They're actually having a summit together on Akiva itself. So with that in mind, Sloan, for whatever reason, takes Wedge Antilles aboard her shuttle, and takes him down to the planet in order to be a part of the summit meeting, I guess wanting to keep her enemies close. I'm not really too sure about that, but okay, it is what it is. Nora, however, is trying to convince Temmin to leave with her, to leave the planet. She's abandoned him for 3 years. She doesn't realize the kind of person that he's become and the things that he's had to do in order to make ends meet, dealing with criminals, going scavenging, things like that. And it's just a little bit... It's a little bit of a frayed relationship because of it. He's turned their former home into this weird workshop where he spends time with droids, including something he's calling Mr. Bones. Like, it's almost to a point where how is her son gone a little bit crazy, He sells junk to make ends meet and hangs out with a fucking robot he calls Mr. Bones. That's a bit weird. But secrets are secrets. And on the inside of the store, they actually have treasure. Below the store, that's where the real goods are. That's where he actually deals with the properties and the things that are worth true money. All of this is, of course, offset by the fact that she abandoned him for 3 years in the first place when he was in a real transitionary period of his life. I think he's about 15 or 16 at this point, which would have meant that she would have abandoned him when he was about 12 or 13. Formative years for anybody. And he doesn't have a father, incidentally. The father was killed or not killed because they're looking for him. Taken away somewhere by the Empire because they were able to figure out that he's been helping the rebels. So his mother was all he had, and she left. So you can't blame him for being bitter. You can't blame him for holding a grudge and being angry. Although, again, making your own friends is a little bit weird, but hey, there you go. That's neither here nor there. But she's trying to convince him to come with her, that they can finally have their life together and be a family. And I'll take a quote here, because what she ends up doing is a little bit odd. "I can't leave here. This is my home. We have a new home now. You don't get to just kidnap me, and I can because I am your mother." End quote. And yeah, so that's a little bit weird because, you know what, Nora, kidnapping is still kidnapping, and if he doesn't want to go with you and you're forcing him against his will, that's kind of a little bit weird. And that's kind of exactly what she does. She sort of injects something into him in his neck, knocking him out, and then kidnapping him. That's exactly what she does, just straight kidnaps. And it was just a little bit weird. That hit me as a bit of an odd thing to do for a good guy. somebody who we are here to register as, oh, she's the heroine of the piece. She's a good guy. We're going to get behind her. And, oh, here she is knocking out her son and carrying him away with the goal to take him off planet with her. It's just a little bit weird. Now, this is the point when the story takes a little bit of a weird turn. And not because of the main narrative thrust of the story, but because we actually enter a new sort of means of telling the story. We're cutting away. This is like a movie at this point. The way it's written, the way that it's presented, it feels like it's a movie. And this was, again, something that one of the initial drafts of Temporary was very, very critically received and reviewed because of this. And here it is in effect, which to me is wonderful, because I'm like, okay, cool. So you can write this style. That's just an opinion that guy had. And that's all anything ever really falls down to. Right on. Awesome. So yeah, the easiest thing I can compare it to is a cutaway. We cut away to an interlude. That's what each one of these are titled as, interlude. And we jump away to a completely different mini story happening somewhere else in the galaxy that just all happens to have that constant through line, that constant thread of connection, which is, this is the fallout. This is what happens after the Empire falls. This is how families fall apart. This is how people deal with it, so on and so forth. And I find it odd. It takes away from the story only insofar as it distracts you completely from the main narrative thread. And because of that, I don't think they're completely necessary. I really don't. I don't think it's added anything. And I think if you were to take them away or gloss over them, if you were to read this book again and choose not to read those sections, you wouldn't miss a thing because of it. Which ultimately begs the question, well, should it be in the book? My initial response would be, nope, not needed. Now, as the Imperials gather together in order to discuss the fine minutiae of what the fuck they're going to do in an empireless or Palpatine-less empire, one of them makes a really, really good point that I just wanted to highlight to you. I actually really enjoyed this quote because it really encapsulates this concept that, oh yeah, even though we were following these main characters within the initial 6 movies, there's a whole world that exists within that with people with opinions and things like that may not necessarily have agreed with Palpatine's choices or direction of where they were going. And this is actually from a character called Shale, who says, and I quote, "Let me make this abundantly clear to all who dare listen. We lost this war. We played with a foolish, overconfident, reckless hand, and we paid the price for it." End quote. I think that pretty much encapsulates a frustrated, loyal Imperial officer with the decisions that were made that she had no control over. And this is where they're at right now. So I think she has every right to be annoyed, especially if she believes in the Empire, which is an interesting concept because, it's like what they discussed in Clerks. Not everybody would have been clone troopers at this point. People would have elected to join the Empire. This is a decision people would have made because it was something that they believed in. Just in the same way that the rebels believed in their cause as the Rebel Alliance. Now the new Republic. There we go. And we're now introduced to another character called Jaz Amari, who's a bounty hunter, who has a hit out on one of the people who are taking part of this coalition of high-ranking Imperials. She's here to take out a character called Arson Crassus. But she realizes, before she takes the shot, that if she's able to take out everybody, her payday explodes. It grows exponentially because why kill or capture just one when she can do all? Because they're all wanted individuals now that the New Republic has its hooks into what's happening politically and economically and everything like that. Her attempt, however, is squandered because the pilot of the ship sees what she's about to do and shoots her off her perch. Now, this is where the writing allows us to finally start getting these characters to start crossing over, because her character wakes up and she's introduced to Surat Nurat thinks that she's a part of Temen's outfit, which she's not, of course, but he takes her captive. And this then leads us to have Sinjar meet her, because when Surat returns to the shop, he finds Sinjar there, who's actually searching for a way to get off planet. And at this point, we actually discover that Sinjar and Jaz have met each other before, as he has a flashback. Yes, a flashback in a book, not a movie, but in a book, to Endor, to after the point when the rebels had blown the shield generator and they're all partying and celebrating. And he remembers seeing a bounty hunter fleeing the scene, a Zabrak bounty hunter fleeing the scene. He puts two and two together and realizes, well, that has to be her. And it brings up some interesting concepts of who they were then as opposed to who they are now. And he tries to talk to Surratt and negotiate her freedom. But Surratt, suspects that something's up. They're playing a game. And again, just like with the bar, it ends up in a fight scene of some sort as they open fire on him. We're then treated to another portion of the book, which this character actually features throughout. I think this is more so than in the movies. He gets his hero moments here where Admiral Akbar, he of It's a Trap fame, he features heavily throughout, actually, as the guy who orchestrates rescue missions or attack plots and things like that. He deserves getting a lot of prop during here. And he's such a weird character to go back to and utilize, but use them they do. And it's great to see him make a comeback. In between him and Wedge, there's only a few others that come back from the old canon that we are all familiar with. But at this point, we go back to Nora and Temmin. And it's how do you react to being knocked out by your own mother who's not been with you for 3 years and then tries to drag you off planet? It's a weird situation to be in. And I took a quote here. She admires him, that's Temmin. He's like his father, single-minded and driven, but he's got her stubborn streak, her anger, her cocky sure-footedness, the same sure-footedness that made her leave this planet and join the Rebel Alliance under the foolish assumption she alone would be able to find out where they were keeping her husband and... well, what? Rescue him? Like he was a princess trapped in a tower like the old fairy tales? What a blubber-headed notion that was. End quote. Now, this is something that Chuck talked about in interviews as well, and he hits the nail on the head here, maybe even to, there's not much subtlety in what he's doing. There's not. And I like subtlety in writing. I think that arguably some of what I've written for Temporary is maybe too subtle. It'll go over some people's heads, but for those that get it, I think they'll appreciate what I'm trying to allude to and trying to get at. But there's a fine line between pandering and hand-holding and being too subtle to a point where you can't see the point that's being made at all. And again, it's a fine fucking line to get that right. And I think he goes just too far to one side with this. I think he's holding the hands of the reader a little bit too much and being like the old fairy tales? Huh. What a blubberhead that she... Now, pay attention to the pronouns. She's rescuing him. Now, there's nothing wrong with gender reversal. There's nothing wrong with strong female characters. I'm all for it. Fantastic. And there's something that happens later on that caused a fucking stink that I'll talk about in a little bit of detail because of how ridiculous it all is. But there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I just find that there is an issue with hitting us over the head with it. And this gender reversal is, of course, furthered by the fact that she ends up becoming the leader of the ragtag group that includes all the characters I've talked about previously, the Bounder Hunter, Jazz, Sinjit, Temmin, herself. And she leads the charge in order to try and save Wedge once she gets the orders through, which come through they do. There's a lot of stuff that happens where they keep cutting back to what's going on with the council, but I'm going to be completely honest with you. A lot of that stuff, although necessary to keep the story chugging along and to keep them in one place, isn't very interesting to talk about. Like, one of them wants to go out to war, bring the Star Destroyers in to destroy them. The other wants to retreat out and then recuperate. And, there's a lot of back and forth. Too much back and forth, even. It stops being engaging. It stops being high political drama, and it just starts being kind of petulant back and forth, making it not very interesting to read, not really interesting to engage with, and certainly not very interesting to discuss as the Imperial Future Council, IFC, go back and forth and back and forth. It's a little bit of a waste until the end because obviously they need them where they are in the Satrap Palace in order to take them out. Because as our characters naturally come together, they come up with a plan. The best thing that they can do that helps them all out, so they all have agency and purpose to commit to this plan, is to take everybody out. Nor fulfills her need for the Rebel Alliance. Jazz fulfills her need for the bounty, so they'll get paid and they'll split it each way. Sinjit gets revenge on the Empire that has controlled him for so long and he hates so much. And Temmin gets his payback as well because of the rule that he's been under for all these years, especially the years that he was alone trying to make ends meet. Although, I mean, I say he was alone. He actually stayed with Nora's sister, Esmel, who's such a underdeveloped character that is not even really, she's not even really worth talking about. At one point, he says that he's going to be there to meet Nora, who goes there and finds that she's actually alone, and her and her sister have it out during this scene. Who's all like, you have no right to come here and just say this. You've been away, blah, blah, blah. It's very, very standard, almost EastEnders stock soap opera back and forth. Like, you have no right to come back here, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, not great. Temmin, who said he was going to be there, but actually went back to his store, ends up being captured by Surat Nurat's thugs, who are still looking for this thing that they believe he has, because they are adamant that he's stolen from them. And let's not forget, he keeps treasure below the store. All the shit's upstairs, the good stuff's downstairs. Now, this is the point when everything converges, where our characters all get to meet each other, because Sinjir, who wakes up after being knocked out earlier, is in a cage next to a cage with Jazz in it as well, who's also knocked out earlier. And the one thing that's connected them all is this Surat character. They escape the prison together, in turn managing to rescue Temmin along the way, who's actually about to have his his tongue cut out, which is also pretty gruesome, pretty dark. But that's what you get when you mess with gangsters, man. That's what you get when you steal something from a gangster. Just deny it. They want what they paid for, you know? We don't know what it is just yet. We'll keep you hanging about that. But they managed to get out, and because of that, they all come together, and like I said, they make this deal about what to do, and how can they all help the New Republic and save Wedge Antilles in the process. So they decide to take him out. They're all in the same place, all these Imperial scum, even though they call them Rebel scum, all these Imperials, all these Empire officials. I mean, if you take these guys out all at once, that's it. Like, the war after the war is done. It's over. It's like the equivalent of Valkyrie, the movie with Tom Cruise, you know, obviously based on real life events, where Hitler was a part of a meeting where it just went wrong ever so slightly, the assassination attempt. But had it been successful, the amount of high-ranking Nazis, including Hitler himself, that would have been taken out, it would have changed everything. And I think that's, again, not necessarily a purposeful political comparison point, but there's definitely something here that I think Chuck's trying to achieve. Paralleling sci-fi and putting through a prism so we can look back at our own reality, which all the best sci-fi does, let's be honest. I love reading sci-fi like that. And incidentally, if there's one that you think I'd enjoy, let me know about it. Tweet me, Sweet Story Bro, or email me, sweetstorybro@icloud.com. But this gives us, I mean, honestly, this puts us back on track. We have a clear agenda for these guys who have come together now, working together a la the Rebels crew. And this was the point that I was alluding to earlier. A lot of this, including Temmin, really rings home with the character of Ezra as well. I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think they parallel each other quite a lot, to the point where you're like, well, they're kind of empty characters at that point, because you could just supplant one with the other, and would it really make that much of a difference? I don't really think so. They steal TIE fighters because their end game here is to besmirch and slander the Empire rule on Akiva to a point to finally rile up the people, the population, to rebel, to try and overthrow the people that are still there. That's their intention at this point, to incite a riot for the new alliance. Which is a weird thing to do because, I mean, from the Empire's perspective, and again, you think about this all through perspective, the rebels have always been viewed as terrorists, insurgents, and doing things like this, you can understand why they think that. So I think that's really well handled. It's a very even hand when it's approached through this pragmatic view that Chuck's done it in. And I think all credit to him for doing that, for introducing shades of gray into a story that is so traditionally black and white in terms of what is good and what is bad. So, I mean, they steal... all this builds up to the point where they steal a TIE fighter in order to try and take him out. And this also leads to probably one of the worst sentences in a book I've read in recent times. They steal a TIE fighter. And I quote, "The TIE whipples and wobbles in the air, careening drunkenly across the Mirren rooftops. It zigzags, herkily-jerkily out of sight. End quote. Herkily-jerkily, wibbles, and wobbles before careening drunkenly. No. None of that sentence is good. I'm surprised it made it through. I mean, I said at the top of the show, man, I'm not a professional writer yet. I've certainly not been writing for 15 years in the same way that Chuck has. But this does not strike me as a sentence that has been written by a dude who's been paid for his writing for 15 consistent years. That is a weird herky-jerky thing for me to consider when I can't find a publisher and an editor for mine right now. But the big thing to come from this scene, as I was saying, because they're trying to incite this riot to get the people worked up, Sinjit and Temin actually doctor propaganda footage in order to do so. Insurgents, terrorists, let's not forget that. They bait people in because they think that Sinjit's dead, right? So he approaches a couple stormtroopers, says who he is. They run the ID who says that he's meant to be dead, but they can verify that it's him. So they're like, oh, okay. So they bring him in, and they shoot at Temin, who's wearing like a chest plate made out of metal, so he doesn't die, of course, before they take him out. But they then doctor that footage of them shooting a boy and then send it out as a holovid. So everyone's like, holy shit, the stormtroopers are just killing children now? They're just killing fucking teenagers? Boo them. Boo that. Boo everything that they stand for. I am going to super riot now. And it's interesting because obviously they splice the footage, put it out of context for their own means and purposes. But they're doing exactly what the Empire does. They're creating propaganda to create public sympathy for what they're trying to achieve. They're manipulating them to riot. They're not manipulating them for an opinion. They're manipulating them to pick up arms and fucking riot. Like, that's crazy. And these are the good guys. They're the good guys. You want them to do that in theory. It's great. The doctoring is great, but only in the way that it challenges your preconceived idea of this is what good guys do, this is what bad guys do, because here are good guys doing very much a bad guy thing. It's very Machiavellian. The ends justify the means, because riot they do. The people surge up now. But that's getting ahead of myself just a little bit, because before the people rise up, Nora, in the stolen TIE fighter, on her attack on the satrapy within the castle on Akiva, is shot down, and her last fleeting moments of thought, she tries to turn this into a suicide attack. She tries to careen, not drunkenly, her stolen TIE fighter straight into the satrap where everybody is, regretting the fact that there is no ejector seat in the TIE fighters. Now, she doesn't make it as far as where they are, but instead just careens into the, I believe the palace's sort of grounds or around there. But this is enough to disrupt the Empire's meeting and fan the flames of rebellion even more amongst the Akivan people. And that matters a lot here. But we're treated now to another interlude, and I know that I said earlier that the interludes aren't worth mentioning, they aren't worth reading, you can skip them, and I do stand by that. But this interlude obviously stands out for a reason, and if you've read the book, you'll know why. It has Han and Chewie. Han Solo and Chewie, the two guys that always get into jams and always get out of them too. I assume we've all seen Force Awakens. Now, I have a quote here again from Chuck on the use of interludes, and this is taken from the same interview with the denofgeek.us, and I quote, "The interludes were actually one of my favorite parts of the book, because they're little short stories, like little temporary toe dips into the state of affairs across the galaxy," end quote. Sorry, Chuck, I'm glad you enjoyed writing them, I'm glad you enjoyed dipping your toes into these pools, if you will, but not needed. I really don't think, it just kind of felt like padding. He has another quote on the use of them, and this is actually taken from another interview, this time with Entertainment Weekly. And I quote yet again, "One of the original ideas for Aftermath was to write it almost like World War Z, the novel, not the film, which was a scattering of interstitials. Interstitials? You're watching the world from various places on the globe, so the core idea for Aftermath was to do something like that, to tell this sort of piecemeal. What is the state of the galaxy after Return of the Jedi?" End quote. So it is interesting to kind of see the context and the reasoning why behind the interludes, why they wanted to include them there, the purpose of them as a whole, especially with the writing style a la World War Z, which I have read a long while ago. But I still just don't see the use of them. But there's an importance to this one. You could call this interlude with Han and Chewie a prelude, if you will. Allow me to extrapolate. They're talking with a character called Imra here, and I'm going to quote Imra right now. They're going to do, who can say, a changing of the guards or something, or they need ships for some other planet or some other, I really don't know Solo. The details are fuzzy, but what we do know is the ships that are leaving won't immediately be replaced, which means we have a few days, end quote. Now, what is this in relation to? Imra is informing both Solo and Chewie about an opportunity to liberate Kashyyyk, the Wookiee home planet. Now, I don't like this because it sounds like a trap, not to quote Akbar, but it does indeed sound like a trap, or paraphrase, shall I say. You definitely think that the rebels would have details before getting in contact with Solo. Well, they're not rebels, but like getting in contact with Solo and asking him to divert his Rebel Alliance mission in order to help them. And yet they have nothing to give them? That doesn't sound right to me. You'd think they'd have details. You'd think they'd have a plan. But nope. This appeals directly to Solo's character, though. You know, how Han Solo's always done it. He's always pantsed it, if you will, to take a NaNoWriMo term. You know, no plan, figure out as they go. And that's what he decides to do. He commits to this because Chewie obviously wants to free his people. They take that diversion with little to no plan at all, little to no information, and decide to commit to this. Now, this scene apparently has ramifications in Book 2 of Wendig's Star Wars trilogy. He was talking about that in one of the interviews I was looking at as well. And that's why this is the only interlude worth bringing up again, because it is less interlude and more prelude to what is to come. Hey, do you remember Wedge Antilles, the guy who was at the very start of the book and got captured and then brought down to Akiva? Yeah, so he's stumbling through the Satrap Palace now because after the TIE fighter crashed into it in the suicide run and Nora's suicide run, the power went out. And he was trapped with Magna Cuffs or whatever it happened to be. And because they went out, he was free to roam around and try and get out somehow. And in the process of hiding from troopers and so on and so forth, out of everywhere in the castle, he somehow manages to find a pot to accidentally knock over, which, it just so happens to trigger a secret passage that is right behind him. Isn't that so handy? And he manages to find this just as stormtroopers come back to investigate the noise he caused in the first place. I mean, come on, Chuck, come on. Really? No, that's not okay. That's lazy. It's contrived. It's forced. You've written yourself into a little bit of a corner here, almost literally into a corner with Wedge, and you've given yourself a somewhat Deus Ex Machina to get out of it. Don't buy it. Not good. Didn't enjoy that. And apparently, there's no backup power to this palace, as it's apparently too old, despite being set in the sci-fi future. Although, let's not forget, in a galaxy a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. So, can't really judge that too much. Oh yeah, by the way, in case you were wondering, of course Nora's still alive. There's no way they were going to kill her off the main character, even for the purpose of a second act turn, to allow everybody to immerse themselves in depression and darkness, the point of no return. So she joins them at Pock's establishment, which is the bar earlier, surprising them all by her existence. Mr. Bones actually has the best line here, where he says, "I am glad your existence has not been reduced to scattered atoms, Master Temen's mom." That's great. That's Roger. You have to imagine it in that voice. And apparently it keeps going up and down. I am glad. No, this is annoying. I'm not going to do that. Now, they come up with a plan at this point. And again, it just seems way too convenient, unless I've misread this in some way. And, I have absolutely no doubt that Star Wars fans are going to jump all over this if I have got it slightly wrong. And I embrace you, my friends, my brothers and sisters, with open arms to please correct me and give me the feedback if I have. But the crew, Temen, Nora, etc., they creep through into the satrap through secret tunnels that connect through an old droid factory that happen to connect to the palace. Okay. All right. Nobody went there because of the ghost stories that Temin had to say, and they all laugh at him. And it turns out there's these creatures there that wear droid parts that creep the shit out of everybody. But my immediate question is, if there are secret tunnels that connect to the palace and this old droid factory connects there, how are these monster things not just crept up through the palace and murdered everybody? Do they really just keep themselves to themselves underground? Like that struck a weird chord for me because it didn't seem to make immediate sense. But here we are. We're at this point now. Probably the most throwaway line in the book, and yet the most controversial as well, which makes no sense. In a bit of dialogue between Jazz and Sinjir, who have a great exchange, it's revealed that Sinjir is gay. And apparently this angered a lot of people, and I did some research into this because I couldn't understand why it would. In fact, I'll let the man himself explain his take on it, because I think this encapsulates it pretty much perfectly. And this is him talking about the complaints that people had in regards to Sinjir's homosexuality. This is taken from his personal blog, so you can find it there, which is terribleminds.com. End quote. And if you're upset because I put gay characters and a gay protagonist in the book, I got nothing for you. Sorry, you squawking saurian, meteor is coming. And it's a fabulously gay Nyan Cat meteor with a rainbow trailing behind it, and your mode of thought will be extinct. You're not the Rebel Alliance. You're not the good guys. You're the fucking Empire, man. You're the shitty, oppressive, totalitarian Empire. If you can imagine a world where Luke Skywalker would be irritated that there were gay people around him, you completely miss the point of Star Wars. It's like trying to picture Jesus kicking lepers in the throat instead of curing them. Stop being the Empire. Join the Rebel Alliance. We have love and inclusion and great music and cute droids. End quote. Cool. I'll leave it there, man. I think you nailed it on the head with that, because I cannot fathom why people would be upset about this. I mean, he was an awesome character. I mean, do people really think that, yeah, he was an awesome character, but now that he's gay, he's not an awesome character? That's just silly. And it's presented in such a great way as well, where Jazz approached him. And, he approached Jazz, and she was under the impression that he wanted to court her. He wanted to be with her in some way. And she said, yes, I find you somewhat desirable. I find you somewhat attractive. This can be a thing that can happen. And he goes, oh, no. You've got the wrong idea, man. Like, I'm not into you. And it's not that I'm not into you. It's that I'm not into girls. It's the female species as a whole. And yeah, that's what leads us here with this discussion, which frankly in 2016 is ludicrous to think of. Honestly, the fact that people are getting so up in arms over this, it just didn't make sense to me, honestly. Now, as they're making their way through these catacombs underneath in order to get to the palace, the satrap, we have a discovery over what is actually being taken from Nurat, the gangster. And it's not a weapon. It turns out to be data cubes. And after a conversation that Jazz has with Temin, they agree to sell them together in order to split the bounty, the profit, as soon as this is over, because they're going to sell them to the right client, of course. So after an amazing action sequence, probably one of the best action sequences in this book, honestly, where they're being swarmed by these monsters or aliens, should I say, primitive aliens wearing the droid parts. It kind of in my head reminded me of the goblins underneath in the Mines of Moria in the Lord of the Rings. They get through, they fight their way through, they get it, however they do it, they get into the palace, but are sold out because they are taken prisoner. And it is this point where everybody turns their judgment towards Sinjir, the maybe not Imperial loyalty officer. Only it turns out it's not him. It turns out that Sinjir is innocent and that his hatred of the Empire is still steadfast, because it was Temin who made the deal, apparently at some point with Ray Sloan. Temin, in an effort to protect himself, his mother, and get out of that situation alive, has made a deal with the devil, and in the process, Mr. Bones is destroyed trying to save them. Poor old Mr. Bones. B1 droid. B1 Bones, get it? Nora has an interesting perspective about her enemy. And it's a great way because, again, like I said, Chuck does a good job of being able to balance this concept of you're not entirely bad, you're not entirely good, there's shades of gray. And I quote, The Empire presents it's about law and order, but at the end of the day, it's about dressing up oppression in the costume of justice. End quote. And I like that. I like that quote. I thought that was a good piece of writing that I just wanted to kind of highlight, because how many times can you think that about your own personal government or governments around the world, serving their own interests, but dressing it up and telling you it's for the greater good? Honestly, it happens all the time. Let's not pretend that it doesn't, but that's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about the story, man, the story of what's going on here, specifically in Star Wars Aftermath. So they get betrayed, but they're in a good position because Wedge, once he was freed earlier, had actually managed to get out that message to Akbar, telling him where he was, telling him he needed help. So he's able to send some assistance to them. This assistance coming in has forced the hand of the Imperials in the Satrap Palace, just deliberating, going back and forth, boring. And so they attempt to leave. They try to flee. And when they are in this process of trying to escape, the golden harp that they're traveling upon is actually shot through, thanks to a small side story character, John Barrel, who was a trooper that parachuted in, one of the only ones to really make it through. He's able to activate the turbo lasers through some percussive maintenance. He literally just fucking hits it until it goes, and it shoots the yacht right through the middle. So it can fly, but it's not completely operational. It's not exactly how they want to be getting out of there, especially considering that you have Commander Agate sent out by Akbar to rescue Wedge now that they know where they are, with the New Republic forces in tow. There's not a good situation for those Imperial officers to find themselves in. So the battle swings in their favor. You know, they're trying to get away, and, you know, the New Republic are just pressing their advantage at this point in time. Now, the yacht, that's what the name of the cruiser they were using, crashes into the Vigilance, one of the Imperial Death Star Destroyers. And this kills one of the characters called Crassus. But it allows the majority of them to escape, actually. Jazz captures Tashu and Shale, whilst Rey and her pilot, a woman called Morna, escape in the landing bay. So Nora does, of course, what Nora does, and she steals another TIE fighter and follows them through a battle. And this is another actually well-written scene, really fun action scenes later on in the book. They do, it sounds trivial to say, but they read like a movie, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what I've learned reading this book. So there was a definite learning lesson for me from this, which is great. I took something away from this, especially coupling that with the information I learned from the kick-ass writer that I read. So Nora steals a TIE fighter, and she's able to get through, and this, some of the stuff she does, man, like, it's so odd. I think there's allusions to her being able to feel the Force a little bit, although I don't know if that's confirmed or not. But the action quickly shifts away to what's happening to the Imperials at this point, because the good guys are actually on the winning side. Everything's swung heavily in their favor. Everything's coming up Millhouse for these guys. So Morna and Sloane escape back to the only remaining Star Destroyer, which is called the Vanquish, which then takes off in hyperspace. So Wedge got freed because of the power out. He sent the message before getting captured again. They got rescued by the troop from from, you know, Nora and Temin and all those guys. The New Alliance presses the advantage that they have, pressing in on the Republic, the Empire, who escape barely. Some of them die in the process, and with their tail between their legs, they jump into hyperspace. And this is huge because, again, this is the aftermath of the war. These are the last pieces that could really have a negative influence on what the New Republic are trying to do. And they've just completely scuppered any sort of plans that they were putting together. They've done it. They've gone out of their way after their initial victory, and this is just the cleanup crew. They're sweeping up now. Akiva is rioting. They don't want this oppressive regime anymore. It's a new day. It's a new dawn, no less. They have a new hope. Oh. Now, of course, everybody's fine afterwards. You know, some people are injured. Nora's injured. Wedge is injured. Nobody dies, though, which is great except for Mr. Bones. Although, him being a droid, he just gets rebuilt. So everybody really, they wrap up very happy story. No major consequences, only teased death. But, you knew what was going to happen anyway. You know, I mean, it's obvious they weren't going to kill off a character of that sort of status. It would have been very brave if they'd actually committed to that, but it being Disney, I really imagine that Chuck had his hands tied in a lot of areas here. So Jazz, Tem, and Singer Jom, the guy who jumped down and helped the laser turrets go off to shoot through the yacht, don't forget, and Mr. Bones are team now. They go on a new mission as set by Akbar to track down Imperial targets. And it's interesting because I'm guessing this is going to leapfrog into Book 2, where they're an established team going around space, a la Firefly, a la, again, Rebels. It definitely has that Rebels feel to it. You can't ignore it. And I think you've almost got two properties that are virtually the same, where you've got a ragtag group of people here, you got a ragtag group of people there. You could really interchange some of these characters and it wouldn't have a massive effect on anything that's going on. And I think that's a problem. I really do, for the expanded universe, because you don't need two of the same thing. All this, and you know, the book actually ends on a really weird point, because I thought it would have been a perfect time to end with the good guys on the swell of happiness, music swells up, credits, you know, but instead, I guess this is the closest thing to like a Marvel stinger at the end of the credits or something like that. I guess that's what they're going for. But Sloane, who's escaped, and she's a good character. Again, I think she's a good person who makes bad choices because of her core beliefs. She believes in the Empire. It'll be really interesting to see how she grows from A New Dawn, from Aftermath, into the books that will follow this. I'd love to see her change her mindset and eventually come over to the light. I'd love to see her as a part of the New Republic at some point. But she speaks with the Fleet Admiral, who is her superior, who tells her that the summit on Akiva with all the people there, all those Imperial high-ranking dudes, that was a test, apparently. And apparently it was a test that she passed because she survived. The basic mindset being, had you failed the test, you would be dead and not worthy of what we have planned for you. But what does this mean? What's the bigger picture here? The bigger picture is the fact that there's still a fleet out there. The bigger picture is there's an admiral who they still have a hierarchy where she is not at the top of the chain. And she's supposed, it's way too much of a cop-out, and I really hope that this is going to be the seed that grows into her descent from the Empire, because that's how I would take it. If somebody gave me that feedback, and it's not feedback, but like, yeah, I survived. What's going on here? Why did this happen? You knew, didn't you? Oh, it was a test. We were testing you all the time. Fuck you. Dumb. The silly motivation, silly excuse. She would see right through that. She's too smart a character to not see that. So I'm interested to see where that goes. But that brings it to the end of the story of Aftermath. I know there were elements I glossed over, mostly because there were other, things that weren't interesting, or more importantly, had no real bearing on the story. And I'm looking at you, interludes. And even, Jom, the character that parachuted down, was only one of the surviving members of his troop to make it through. The only thing that he provided, I say only thing, quote unquote, he obviously provided massive assistance by being able to help with the laser turrets to blow down the yacht as they were trying to escape. But his build-up, his introduction to the story came so late. It really didn't feel developed. It didn't feel earned. Again, it felt like it just felt like a developed Deus Ex Machina. Just like, oh yeah, and here's my way out because here's this dude who came earlier and now he's doing that. Isn't that great? Everything comes together. I love it when a plan comes together. It just seemed too contrived and not in a, oh yeah, I see how everything neatly ties in sort of way, because books ultimately at some point are contrived in the sense that they're planned and plotted. They all need to connect and come together. So what happens by the time you reach the story's end, all those dots can be clearly connected. And although you can sort of say that, the guys coming in the first place, Akbar sending them out, Wedge especially, you might think he was going to be main character, but he's really relegated to a secondary or even tertiary character, really doing nothing but find secret passages, and it's silly. Wedge is, I think they could have done a lot more with Wedge, and I'm not saying in the sense of like, oh, he needed to be rescued. I don't give a shit about that, because like, that's great. Okay, cool. He needs to be rescued. I get that. Awesome. Raise the stakes. But the magna cuffs going off and then him creeping around and finding a secret escape route, being able to send off a transmission saying where they were, and then being found, because that's what happened, man. Like, he sent out the transmission, and then he gets taken down by stormtroopers in a basement, and that's it. Like no big build up for that hero moment. Just like, oh yeah, now he's in the basement. So there's definitely issues with this story. People weren't fond of the writing style, that present tense, the use of staggered static sentences, really short and punchy, and even the most ridiculous stuff where people have issue with the sexuality of a character. I mean, I've actually got a quote from Chuck again, taken from this interview with denofgeek.us. I think it's a great quote. And I think it encapsulates this idea that no matter what you do, you're never, ever going to make everybody happy. And I quote, I think at the end of the day, I'm a very selfish storyteller. It's hard for me to tell a story and appease every fan ever. That's just a non-possibility. So I know at my heart I'm a fan. Like I say, I've been picking and brining in the Star Wars universe for decades now. So at the end of the day, I'm trying to appease me first and appease the people in my life, the friends and family who are fans. End quote. So he's addressing and he's owning the selfish nature of it. Great. There's nothing wrong with that. He's a fan and he's writing for himself as a fan, what he would want to read as a fan. And that doesn't necessarily translate to what everybody who is a Star Wars fan would want to see. And this is just a reality of the game. This is the nature of the beast, man. You are never, ever, ever going to make everybody fucking happy because they got way too many life experiences going through their own personal filters and pragmatic worldviews to be able to just go like, oh yeah, we all love this or we all hate this. But a lot of people didn't. But the real question is, now that we've come to the end of the story, did I? Is this story officially too sweet or just not sweet enough? I like some of the writing. There's also some of the worst writing that I've read in a book recently present here. Wibbly Wobbly Hercule Jerkly is a wonderful example of that, and there's plenty more of it. The use of parentheticals struck me as very weird. I liked the way that it was written almost like a movie. The present tense, although difficult to get to grips with at first, I got eased in pretty quick. And once I did, again, the flow of it, because of it, was very quick, very snappy. Again, it felt like reading a movie script more than a book. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. It depends on your preferences. I know it just didn't bug me. I also didn't mind the short, staggered sentences. That was a non-issue for me. But the story, and of course the writing style, affects how the story is presented. That's why it's so important to make mention of. Did I enjoy the story? I feel that these characters are way too reminiscent of characters I've seen in other things within their own expanded universe, within Rebels, which is a comparison I've made time and time again. I think Temmin and Ezra could just be interchanged with one another. I think a lot of these guys are flat. Singer's one of the only guys who really has a truly rounded character, and that's not because of his sexuality, but because of this interesting duality where he's trained to find the weakness, and he hates the weakness that exists within what he does because of it. I love that. I thought it was great. Nora was a wonderfully strong main character. Jazz was a little bit, I didn't really connect with her too much. The rest of it, there's so much contrived nature to this. The Wedge Antilles stuff alone, the Akbar stuff, throwing in Jom. I really came to this really, really with an open mind, despite what I'd sort of heard. But for me, this story is just not sweet enough. But by all means, if you're a Star Wars fan, do check it out and let me know what you think in regards to this, because I'd love to know what you think, especially on the points I've been making. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What did you love that I hated? What did you hate that I loved? Let me know. And please, as somebody who's just getting into the expanded universe, if there's something that you want to recommend to me that you think I might enjoy from a Star Wars perspective, please do so. I'm interested by the books. I think it's called Lords of the Sith. If that's good, let me know. If you want me to review it, just request it, man. I'll go into detail just like I did on this show. Real depth. That's the idea behind here. That's why these shows are as long as they are, because we get to the nitty-gritty. What happens in the story? This happens in the story. Is this good writing technique? Is that bad writing technique? What happens because of it? And ultimately, as you know, is it officially too sweet or just not sweet enough because of it? So I want to thank you for listening. Let me know what you thought about this show on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or via email at Sweet Story Bro on Twitter, Sweet Story Bro Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, Sweet Story Bro, and email sweetstorybro at iCloud.com. Very simple, very straightforward. You've got a lot of choice, so wherever you want to contact me to let me know your thoughts and your opinions, just do it. absolutely just do it. Like I said earlier, don't second guess it. Just do it. I'll get back to you. No worries. And I really want to bring this up again as well. If you are interested in the competition side of things, if you want me to potentially introduce you to your next favorite story, let me know about the kind of competitions you might be interested in having me run, whether it's just throwing your name and I randomly generate it or pick it out, or I have to ask you a question and you guys get it, make it a little bit more compelling, a little bit more challenging. I'm happy to do it. Just let me know you want it to be done. And this is going to be a new one here. And I feel not a little bit weird, but I've never done this before. But if you like the episode, hey, why not leave a tip? People do this on Twitch all the time. One of my friends gets some good tips this way, and I figured, why not me? Why not try out the podcast route for this? So, a couple bucks here and there maybe for each show, $1 or $2. It's less than a cup of coffee, and it helps the show exponentially, I promise you. I want to keep the show free. I think it will always be free, but things like server costs, they cost money. And just kicking me back a couple of dollars because you enjoy what I do, from the in-depth, nitty-gritty nature of this review to how it affects story, to how writing works within this sort of prism, and of course, most importantly, being aware of it so I can be a better writer too. If this is a journey that you enjoy, why not support it, man? A couple bucks, less than a cup of coffee, and you can send it straight to paypal.me/sweetstorybro. paypal.me/sweetstorybro. Additionally, for all your Sweet Story Bro goodness, just in case all these websites are confusing to you, it's all consolidated in one handy place now. If you go to sweetstorybro.com, everything is right there. And if you're ever going to do anything on Amazon, any Amazon shopping, be sure to go to my site, click on my buy with Amazon.co.uk or Amazon.com if you're American, because it gets a little kickback, a little percentage back to Sweet Story Bro, which allows me to in turn get better equipment and all this stuff that helps the show, I promise you. I really can't put into words how much that would help me and how much I would really, really appreciate it. Just throwing it out there, you'd pretty much be my most favorite person in the world. So until next time, be sure to keep your eyes on Twitter for the Monday mention to find out what the next story is going to be. I'm Steve Russell, imploring you to go enjoy some stories. I'm out.